Hey everybody, we made it. Welcome to the final day of the Throne of Eldraine set review here on the Mana Leek. I'm John, as always, and today we're going to be taking a look at all of the artifacts and the lands in the set. And there's a good chunk of them, because of course there's the blue-white artifact deck, and there are just a bunch of lands. Remember, this is a limited set review. We're talking about limited, we're not talking about anything else. But let's get started with the first card, Clockwork Servant. Which, I'm not going to lie, it really reminds me of like a pretzel bun. Clockwork Servant is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature gnome at uncommon. It's a 2/3 with Adamant. When Clockwork Servant enters the battlefield, if at least 3 mana of the same color was spent to cast it, draw a card. Without Adamant, it's totally filler, and with Adamant, it's like a C+. It's a 2/3 that draws a card. That's fine. I'd happily play this in blue-white all the time as a C+. In other decks, well, it's more of a C. It's more of a take it or leave it. C++ for Clockwork Servant kind of depends on what deck you're in, but it's never unplayable. Crashing Drawbridge is up next. Crashing Drawbridge is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature wall. Hey, it's one of our other walls. At common, it's an 0/4 defender. Tap. Creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Not really a big fan of this. 2 mana for an 0/4 wall does not excite me. We have 0/4s for 1. In this set, I'm not playing an 0/4 for 2 that I can never throw counters on an attack with. I don't ever plan on doing that anyways. The tap to give creatures you control haste is cute, but no. I don't play the auras that specifically give my creatures haste just to give them haste. I don't play Strider Harness. I don't play Crystal Slipper, etc. Not really interested in Crashing Drawbridge. I think it's a D. I think you can side it in if you desperately figure out that you need an 0/4 or something because you're just dying to aggro. But I think this is just a D. D for Crashing Drawbridge. Up next is Enchanted Carriage. Enchanted Carriage is 5 generic mana for an artifact vehicle at uncommon. It's our only vehicle in the set. 4/4 is its power and toughness should it become a creature. When Enchanted Carriage enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white mouse creature tokens and crew for 2. For those unfamiliar with crew, crew means you tap creatures with power equal to or greater than that number combined, in this case 2, and it turns the artifact into a creature, so the power and toughness becomes relevant. If it's not a creature, it doesn't have power and toughness, despite being printed on the card. You can do that at instant speed. Just make sure that you do that before combat. You can't do it as you're declaring attackers. That's too late. So this is fine. I guess it's 5 mana for a 2/2, except the 2/2 can tap and become a 4/4, so it's 5 mana for a 4/4 that doesn't do anything else. It's not great. I don't think you actively play this if you can avoid it. And again, like Clockwork Servant, I think it's probably fine to just instantly put into your blue-white artifact deck, but in the other decks, I think I'm way less likely to play it. So I have it at like a C-. I'm not supremely interested in playing it. Vehicles aren't very good anymore because they were way too good when they first came out, and those days are nightmares that we should all forget about. Except R&D. They need to remember it. Up next is Gingerbrute. Gingerbrute is 1 generic mana for an artifact creature food golem at common. It's a 1/1 with haste. Pay 1. Gingerbrute can't be blocked this turn except by creatures with haste. Pay 2 and tap it. Sacrifice Gingerbrute. You gain 3 life because, of course, he's food. It's, it's cute. It has haste, and you can't catch him because he's the gingerbread man. It's also virtually unblockable in most games because there's not that many creatures that actually have haste. And it's also food. It's all cute, but I don't think that I'm actually interested in this ever. Definitely not in the blue-white artifact deck. We've already seen a couple of artifacts where I'm pretty okay with instantly including them in the artifact deck, whereas this one it's just not good. An unblockable 1/1 that you have to pay to make it unblockable, and sometimes it's not unblockable. Not interested. I've got this at like a D+. I just don't ever want to play Gingerbrute. Not in the artifact deck, not in the food deck. I don't want to play it. I'll eat it, but I won't play it. Golden Egg is up next. Golden Egg is 2 generic mana for an artifact food at common. When Golden Egg enters the battlefield, draw a card, as good eggs do. Pay 1, tap and sack it. Add 1 mana of any color. Pay 2, tap and sack it. You gain 3 life, because it's food. I'm not really interested in this one either, unless I'm splashing or I really want food. If I am in the red or the black-green food deck, The fact that I can make a food for 2 and draw a card, that's pretty handy. I think I would probably include this in the green-black food deck. If I'm in the artifact deck, I don't think this is an auto-include like the Servant is, but I think it's kind of a C in the artifact deck. In any other 2-color deck, I'm not really interested in playing this. You don't want to play this just to be a food. You don't want to play a card that just cycles, and you don't really want to be filtering your mana that much. So I'm not super interested in Golden Egg. If I'm splashing, sure. But I don't know how much you should splash in this format. We'll have to see. If I'm in the food deck, sure, instant include. If I'm in the artifact deck, I'll see if I have a spot. So kind of a range of grades there, kind of like a D, C, C+. It's really deck dependent, I think. Up next is Henge Walker. Henge Walker is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature Golem et common. It's a 2/2 with Adamant. If at least 3 mana of the same color was spent to cast this spell, Henge Walker enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. It's the artifact paladin, I guess. 3 mana 2/2 is not good. It's super duper not good. I don't like playing 3/2s or 2/3s for 3 if I can help it. I certainly don't want to be playing a 2/2. But if it's a 3/3 for 3, well, it's a Centaur Courser. It's totally fine. So yeah, this is I think fine. I think it's like a C, but you really have to make it a 3/3. You never ever want to be playing this as a 2/2. So I actually might go down to a C- here just because of that slight variability on whether or not you actually can make this a 3/3 on 3 with regularity. So let's go with a C- for Henge Walker. Again, blue-white, this is a card that is totally, utterly fine to instantly include as one of your artifacts. And that's what I actually kind of like about the blue-white artifact enchantment deck here is the enchantments. I mean, blue has some fantastic enchantments. And there are some other good ones, but there's a lot of jank and crud as well. Whereas a lot of these artifacts are something I wouldn't want in my deck, but because they're an artifact, it actually bumps them right up to playable. And it's not playing bad cards to enable, your archetype. It's playing fine cards to make your archetype playable, which is better. Up next is Heraldic Banner. Heraldic Banner is 3 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. As Heraldic Banner enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+0. Tap, add 1 mana of the chosen color. This is kind of painful. If you're splashing, you pick your splash color so that you can splash, but then you're likely to get little to no benefit off of the other sentence on this card. If you're not splashing, you're playing a 3 mana basic land. That does also give a power boost to some percentage of your deck. I'm not a big fan of this. I'm going to start out actively not playing it. I've got it at a D. I'm not really interested in what's going on here. I think it fights with itself. +1/+0 is very different from +1/+1. So yeah, Heraldic Banner, D. We'll see if it's better than I think, but I don't think it's actually any good. Up next is Inquisitive Puppet. Inquisitive Puppet is 1 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at uncommon. It's an 0/2. When Inquisitive Puppet enters the battlefield, scry 1. Exile Inquisitive Puppet. Create a 1/1 white human creature token, because of course he becomes a real boy. It's flavorful, but it's not terribly good. An 0/2 that scries 1 doesn't really feel worth it to me. It doesn't block well, it doesn't do anything, and getting to turn it into a real boy, probably after blocking something so that you stop the damage, so you block and then before damage you sack it, turn it into a 1/1, isn't really that exciting either. Turning it into a 1/1, getting the value out of it, means that it's no longer an artifact for your Artifact Matters deck. I don't know. I'm not really looking to play this, not in the Artifact Matters deck or really any deck, I don't think. I have it at a D. I don't know. Prove me wrong. I think there's better, more impactful, more useful stuff. D for Inquisitive Puppet. Up next is Jousting Dummy. Jousting Dummy is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature Scarecrow Knight at common. It's a 2/1. Pay 3. Jousting Dummy gets +1/+0 until end of turn. How much will you pay for Fire Breathing? I'm not a massive fan of paying 1. I'll pay 1. But 2 is typically too much. 3 is way too much. So this is just a very mediocre piker with a relevant creature type of knight, to be fair, but it's a 2/1 for 2. We've seen so many good knights at uncommon and common that you can get better stuff than Jousting Dummy. I don't think I want this terribly anywhere. It's a super duper cuttable C-. If you are desperate for a creature, it is an option. It's an artifact, it's a knight, but it's not good. C- for Jousting Dummy. Lochthwain Gargoyle is up next. Lochthwain Gargoyle is 1 generic mana for an artifact creature Gargoyle at common. It's an 0/3. Pay 4. Lochthwain Gargoyle gets +2/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. Again, not a great artifact. An 0/3 for 1 is not what you ever want to be playing. As I've said, we have 0/4s for 1. And then later in the game, you can fly in for 2, but you do pay 4 mana for that privilege, which means you're probably not doing a whole lot else that turn. Not a big fan of Lochthwain Gargoyle. I don't really want to play this in any deck, not even in the blue-white artifacts deck. So I've got this at a D+. I don't think it's very good. Lucky Clover is up next. Lucky Clover is 2 generic mana for an artifacted uncommon. Whenever you cast an adventure, instant, or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. Super not a fan of this. Super not a fan of this. I would have to have an absolutely ludicrous number of adventure spells for me to go in on this. I'd have to be green-white, and I don't know, I think I'd want 9? 10? I would want the majority of my creatures to be adventure creatures. If that's the case, then I might play this, with the massive problem that if you draw this on turn 7 or 8 or 9, it's gotten pretty late, and it's not gonna do much for you. So, I don't know. I need to see this actually work before I'm ever going to give it a go. I have it as a D. It's obviously a build around, and I don't think it's worth building around. So I've got Lucky Clover at a D. If it proves me wrong, awesome. I'll start picking it more highly. But the deck that I would need for this to be playable, I don't know how often it's going to come together. Up next is Prophet of the Peak. Prophet of the Peak is 6 generic mana for an artifact creature cat at common. It's a 5/5. When Prophet of the Peak enters the battlefield, scry 2. A 5/5 for 6 is not something I ever really want to play, not if it doesn't have some sort of trample or something on it, or flying or whatever. And if it just scries 2 for me, well, I'm not terribly a fan of that either. There's better artifacts for you to play in the blue-white artifact deck, and there's better creatures for you to play in every other deck. I find Prophet of the Peak to be extraordinarily cuttable. I think it's below a C-. I think it is a D+. I think it's a creature that you absolutely should avoid playing whenever humanly possible. 6 mana is a lot. It needs to do way more than this card does. Roving Keep is up next. Roving Keep is 7 generic mana for an artifact creature Wall at common. It's a 5/7 defender, but you can pay 7 mana to make Roving Keep get +2/+2 and gain trample until end of turn, and it can attack this turn as though it didn't have defender. I don't think Roving Keep's very good. I mean, if you can cast it, then you can also presumably activate it, unless you, I don't know, used a golden goose and sacrificed your last food to cast it. But can you get to 7 is the big question here. My bet is that it will be a tall ask, with go wide and aggro strategies having serious support. Also, this is at common, and I think if this was a reliable plan that you were frequently going to have a 7/7 trample, this would be uncommon. Maybe even rare. There's no way it would be at common. My instinct is this costs way too much to be useful, but I think this is a very, 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 very format-dependent card, so I will keep an eye on it. I think it's a D, and I think you just actively never, ever, ever play this, but I'll keep a brief eye on it. But I'm confident in that D. Scalding Cauldron is up next. Scalding Cauldron is 1 generic mana for an artifact at common. Pay 3, tap, and sacrifice Scalding Cauldron. It deals 3 damage to target creature, not to target player, so you can't hit the opponent, but this seems like a very good card. 1 mana, and then 3 mana later to deal 3 damage is pretty big. I feel like we had a card that was 1 and 3 and dealt 2. Can't quite remember if those were the exact numbers, but this seems pretty decent. Plus, it's an artifact for the blue-white deck. Well, it sticks around anyways. Could be recurred with things like Emery. I think this card's actually pretty decent. It's not a high pick. It's not a pick that you're just going to go crazy for, but I think it is a C+. I think I'm actually happy with this in every deck, and in the blue-white deck, perhaps, if you don't use it too early, it gets a little bit of extra value. C+ for Scalding Cauldron. Up next is Shambling Suit. Shambling Suit is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at uncommon. It's a star 3. Shambling Suit's power is equal to the number of artifacts and/or enchantments you control. This is obviously a blue-white card, but it happens to be colorless. You are never, ever, 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 ever playing this in any color other than blue-white, because it's going to be a 1/3, or I don't know if you're lucky, like a 2/3 or something. But in blue-white, maybe this is a 3/3 or a 4/3 or even bigger, in which case it's fine. Like, I'm never excited about a 4/3 or a 5/3 or a 6/3 or a 7/3. Heck, we had a 9/3. We had Yargle. And I didn't really care for it because 3 toughness is very, very low. But it obviously turns on and helps out all of the other various artifact synergies. So I think in blue-white, this is an easy C+. You're going to play this all the time. It's not going to be insane. Even if this is huge, it still dies really easily. So just a C+ in blue-white. If you're in other decks, don't even touch it. Just give this to the blue-white player. They're the only person who's allowed to have it. C+ for Shambling Suit in that one deck. Signpost Scarecrow is up next. Signpost Scarecrow is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature Scarecrow at common. It's a 2/4 with Vigilance, and you can pay 2 to add 1 mana of any color. This is bad. This is real bad. It's a 2/4 for 4 with Vigilance, which I'm not ever stoked about. That's what I think of as a traditional knight. Way back when, a lot of knights were 4 mana for 2/4s, and they often had Vigilance. This one's not even a knight, and then you pay 2 to filter a mana, which is insane. I don't like Signpost Scarecrow. I don't think it's playable in any deck. I think it's a D-. I think you should do everything humanly possible to never play this non-human. D- for Signpost Scarecrow. Up next is Sorcerer's Broom. Sorcerer's Broom is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature Spirit at uncommon. It's a 2/1. Whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you may pay 3. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Sorcerer's Broom. This is also awful. It's a 2/1 for 2, which is super duper cuttable. So we're going to keep this at a C- at worst. That's where pikers usually are. You really don't want to play them, but if you have to, if you desperately need a creature, you can, and it's not the worst thing in the world. But sack outlets typically aren't free. There are a few different free ones, especially with food in this set, but a lot of the times you're paying 2 mana to sack that food, or you're paying something. You're paying Rakdos to sack something, and then paying 3 mana on top of that to get a 2/1 is not really exciting. And then I don't know what world you're living in that you're sacking something and then both of your brooms are triggering and you're paying 6 to get 2 more brooms. That's so much mana to get 2 1s. So I think this is super duper cuttable. It's a C-, and it's only a C- because it's a piker that you can play if you must. C- for Sorcerer's Broom. Up next is Sorceress Spyglass. Sorceress Spyglass is 2 generic mana for an artifact at rare. As Sorceress Spyglass enters the battlefield, look at the opponent's hand, then choose any card name. Activated abilities of sorceries with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. This card is unplayable. It's an F. It is not for limited play. Do not play this card. I don't care about sideboard options, and I don't care about that time that you sided it in and you named their planeswalker and their planeswalker was there and then they played it and they couldn't do anything with it. Good for you. You won the lottery. It's not gonna happen 99.9% of the times. You will win infinitely more games if you never play or side in Sorceress Spyglass. F. Up next is Spinning Wheel. Spinning Wheel is 3 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Pay 5, tap target creature. I'm not super sold on this one. How much will I pay to tap a creature? 5 is a very, 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 very tall ask. I can stop their bomb from attacking me, but I can't really do anything else. Also, being a mana rock is cute, but 5 mana. I don't know. I don't know if I can swallow that pill. I'm already betting the format's going to be ever so slightly on the side of speedy due to the go wide decks. The Rakdos aggro deck looks pretty aggro-y. Even the super high value combo decks, like drawing 2 cards a turn, they still want to bury you in value really, really fast. So I don't know if Spinning Wheel's going to be good enough. It's probably better in Sealed, which is slower by nature. But in Draft, I'm going to have to keep an eye on this one. I'm going to start it at a D+. I don't think it's playable. I think if you're splashing, sure, go ahead. This is a good way to splash. But otherwise, I think I don't want it. So I'm going to start at a D+ on Spinning Wheel. And I'm going to see if 5 mana to tap a creature is something we can handle in this format. My instinct is we can't. Up next is Stonecoil Serpent. Stonecoil Serpent is X generic mana for an artifact creature Snake at rare. It's a 0/0 with reach, trample, and protection from multicolored. And Stonecoil Serpent enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. I love it. We've seen this in the past, and a creature that always passes the vanilla test isn't actually amazing. Endless One in Battle for Zendikar was this card without any of the additional text on it, and it wasn't great. It passes the vanilla test at 1, 2, 3, 7, 12, 64, etc. But without any sort of ability, it didn't do much. But this one, you slap trample on it, now we're talking. Anything above like a 4/4 trample is impactful. Build your own Colossal Dreadmaw, done. Build your own 10/10 trample, done. This thing will be very bomby late game with some other little extras like reach and protection from multicolor. I think you first pick this and it just goes in every single deck. I think that's about as A as you can get. This is just the definition of an A. Super A for Stonecoil Serpent. Our second last artifact for today is Weapon Rack. Weapon Rack is 4 generic mana for an artifact at common. Weapon Rack enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. But it's not a creature. Tap it, move a +1/+1 counter from Weapon Rack onto target creature. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery, so no combat shenanigans going on here, unfortunately. I'm not really a big fan of this. The combat tricks where you get counter on your creatures are typically fine, like Dragon Scale Boon, giving 2 +1/+1 counters to a creature was pretty solid. It also untapped the creature. Giving potentially one creature 3 +1/+1 counters, but doing so over the course of 3 turns, or spreading those counters out over the course of 3 turns, and having put 4 mana into it, is just not something that I'm really looking forward to doing. So I really don't want to play Weapon Rack. I've got it like a D. I think you can try it out if you want to. I think realistically it's just an F. I don't think it's going to do enough. It's going to be way too slow and way too unimpactful. You know, if you put a +1/+1 counter on something and they kill it, and then you put another +1/+1 counter on something and it's not big enough, so then you have to put the other +1/+1 counter on it, and now it's been 3 turns and who knows what's happened. There's too much time that has to go into this. So a D for Weapon Rack. I don't really want to play it. Our final artifact for today is Witch's Oven. Witch's Oven is a single generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Tap, sacrifice a creature, create a food token. If the sacrificed creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens. It was a big creature. It makes a lot of food. I don't know about this. It's so cheap, and the sacrifice outlet is free. Turning creatures into food is another flavor win, but power win? I'm less certain about that. This obviously is going to be the heart of some engines for the food deck or something, or maybe there's a solid sacrifice deck, but the only real way we saw of stealing creatures temporarily was the one that does it for CMC 3 or less. Getting 2 food seems like primarily a contingency plan if the creature's going to die, or it's been trapped in a tower or something, because why else are you killing your big creature just to make 2 food? Like I said, being a free sack outlet helps. I don't know, I'll keep an eye on this, but this is definitely one of those, it's good with this card and this card put together in this deck kind of cards that I typically shy away from, because what if you don't draw all of the pieces to make it all work? So, I don't know, Witch's Oven kind of confuses me a little. I think it's kind of like a C in the food deck. It's a way of easily, basically freely, except for sacrificing the creature, making food. but we'll see. I'll start it at a C- for Witch's Oven, but I don't know. It can absolutely drop right down to unplayable, and it could go up a little tiny bit. C- for Witch's Oven. That was all for artifacts. We are coming into the home stretch. We just have some lands to look at, and there are 11 of them. The first land is Castle Ardenvale. Castle Ardenvale is a land at rare. Castle Ardenvale enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a plains. Tap to add a white. Pay 2 white and tap it. Create a 1/1 white human creature token. This isn't crazy, but it's also pretty darn decent. Yeah, it sucks if you have to play this on turn 1 or 2 or 3 as your plains and it comes in tapped, but as long as you have another plains, it's just another plains, except later in the game when you don't have anything to do with 4 mana, or technically 5 mana, I suppose, because you have to tap this too, you can make a 1/1, and that 1/1's not going to be very impactful, but in the go wide deck, it's going to help you build up, it's going to help you chump, it's going to get some value out of it. I know a lot of people put way too much value into 1/1s. They're not that good, and getting a few of them isn't that good. You really need a massive critical mass of them or something to do with them to make them actually good. But there's nothing wrong with a land because it doesn't even take one of the 23 card slots out of your deck. It's sort of a free card, as it were, and the ability is actually pretty decent. I think it's kind of like a B-. I don't, want to grab this first pick or second or third or fourth or necessarily even like fifth-ish. But once I know that I'm white, I'll pick it up. I'll put it in my deck. B- for Castle Ardenvale. Castle Embereth is a land at rare, and it also comes in tapped unless you control a mountain. You tap it to add a red, and you can pay 1 red and tap it. Creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. This one I'm even less of a fan of. 1 red to give all of my creatures +1/+0. It's 4 mana, again, remember, because you also have to tap this land. Remember how we talked about Ferocity of the Wilds? And I didn't really want to play that enchantment that gave my creatures +1/+0. Remember how I've talked about how +1/+0 is nowhere near as good as +1/+1? That all comes into play here. 1 red plus tapping this land to do this ability doesn't really excite me, but again, this is sort of a free pick. It's one of your lands. It's not one of your cards, one of your actual playable cards. So it's sort of a free pick. And you play an extra draft pick, which means you've done better. So I'm still playing this in any red deck where I'm planning to attack with multiple creatures, but it's not something that I'm going super out of my way for. I think Castle Embereth is just a C+. Castle Garenbrig is a land at rare, and same thing, it comes in tapped if you don't control a forest, and you can tap it to pay a green. You can pay 2 green and tap it to add 6 green. Spend this mana ability only to cast creatures or activate abilities of creatures. I really don't care for this one. I'm paying 5 mana because you have to tap this land to make 6 mana. I'm ramping, except I can't ramp until turn 5. No, just absolutely not. This is a forest, and very rarely will it ever matter that you can potentially get an extra mana out of this. This is a very low pick. This is a card that I wouldn't even put in every green deck, I don't think. I think it's like a C. I really don't care about Castle Garenbrig. I don't think it's any good. A lot of people will look at this and say it's 4 mana. You tap it, you get 6 mana. It ramps you by 2. But it doesn't, because you have to tap this land too. Not good. C. I'm never going to play this because someone else is going to pick it. Castle Garenbrig, a C. It's not any good, but it's kind of free, so you can still play it. Castle Lochthwain is a land at rare. Castle Lochthwain enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp. Tap, add black. Pay 1 black, tap, draw a card, then lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. This one I like. This one I like a lot because in limited, you don't have a hand. You don't have a hand of 7 cards at turn 8 or turn 9 or turn 10. Or if you do, you're either in a very bad spot or a very good spot, which means this is often 1 black, draw a card, lose a life. Maybe lose 2 life, and that is totally fine. And you don't even have to do it. Otherwise, it's just a free card that has gone into your deck. Castle Lochthwain I quite a bit. I've got it at a strong B. I'm not first picking it. I can't see a pack where I'm first picking it, but I'm picking it way higher than the previous 3 that we've seen so far. A B for Castle Lochthwain. Castle Vantress is our last castle. Castle Vantress is a land at rare. Castle Vantress enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. Tap to add a blue. Pay 2 blue, tap, scry 2. This one I also like. I like it less than drawing a card, but scry 2 is getting close to drawing a card, sort of, in value considerations. And yeah, it's exactly what blue wants to do. Be a thing, except for those turns where you didn't do anything else and you have some leftover mana, and then you can do a different thing. I like this at like a B-. I think it is slightly worse than Lochthwain, but with the upside that you could do this even if you have 7 cards in your hand and not just, Lava Axe and shock yourself at the same time. So yeah, let's go with a B- for Castle Vantress. I think it's a very good castle. Way better than Garenbrig. Garenbrig's a bad castle. Leaving the castles, we go on into Dwarven Mine. Dwarven Mine is a land mountain, so it's not a basic land, but you can fetch it if something says, hey, fetch a mountain. It's at common. It taps to add a red because it's a mountain. Dwarven Mine enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other mountains. When Dwarven Mine enters the battlefield untapped, create a 1/1 red dwarf creature token. This cycle is interesting, and I feel like every time I read it, I think about a different aspect of it. It only comes in untapped if you control 3 or more mountains. You have to be pretty darn red for that to be a thing that happens. And the other thing that I read while I was doing these notes, because originally I had different grades for these, is that it has to come in untapped for the ability to happen. That's very different than the ability just always happening. So Dwarven Mine, I really dislike, because this is not coming into play untapped until turn 4 at the absolute earliest. And unless you're mono red or extraordinarily heavily red, it's probably not until turn 5, 6, 7, at which point you get a 1/1? No. No. Not interested in Dwarven Mine. I have Dwarven Mine at a C-. Again, it's kind of that thing where it's a land, you can play it, and maybe you get that 1/1 on turn 5, and congrats, you got some value, but it doesn't really matter. So C- for Dwarven Mine. Leaving behind that cycle for a second, we're going to go to Fabled Passage. Fabled Passage is a land at rare. Tap, sacrifice Fabled Passage, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then, if you control 4 or more lands, untap that land. So it's an Evolving Wilds, except if it's not on turn, 4 or earlier, it's a fetch land Evolving Wilds, which is nifty. Yeah, Fabled Passage seems totally fine. I actually would probably play this a fair bit in dual color decks in this format, because there are, those red, blue sorceries. There's a lot of kind of heavy color requirement cards, and I think Fabled Passage is really going to help there. The fetch land style untapped clause doesn't super matter, but it's a cool little bonus. So yeah, Fabled Passage I think is like a C+ in this format. Even if you're not splashing, I think it can help your mana base a little bit, which you might need in this format. So C+ for Fabled Passage. Gingerbread Cabin is up next. Gingerbread Cabin is a land forest at common. You can tap to add green. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other forests. When Gingerbread Cabin enters the battlefield, create a food. Yeah, this is just a straight up bonus. I think the food is going to be way more impactful than the 1/1 dwarf is on turn 4 or 5 or 6 or later. Yeah, Gingerbread Cabin's just like a C. Include it if you're playing green, especially if you're playing green-black. But, don't go out of your way for it. Just a C for Gingerbread Cabin. Idyllic Grange is a land plains at common. You can tap it to add a white. Idyllic Grange enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more plains. When Idyllic Grange enters the battlefield untapped, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Getting a +1/+1 counter on turn 4 or 5 or 6 or later is a cool little bonus. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's a pretty low cost to put Idyllic Grange in your white deck. Obviously on turn 1, if you really needed that on tapped plains, or turn 2 or turn 3 for that matter, it's going to kind of suck. But I don't know, I think the bonus is just here enough that you will always play this card. It's kind of like a C+, because it is one of those free cards where it doesn't take up one of your 23 card slots, and you do get that little bonus some amount of the time. So I like Idyllic Grange. I have it as a C+. I'd put it in every single white deck, and sometimes I don't get the value, and sometimes I do, and it's fine. C+ for Idyllic Grange. Up next is Mystic Sanctuary. Mystic Sanctuary is a land island at common. You tap it, add a blue. Mystic Sanctuary enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more islands. When Mystic Sanctuary enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. I'm not hugely interested in this one. Blue-white, I don't think necessarily needs it. Blue-green, I don't think necessarily needs it. Blue-black will potentially have some options and may even have milled itself. Blue-red could have some, like, draw a card options. But I feel like this one's way less likely to just always be able to get value out of it. The green one always makes a food. The white one always puts a counter on it, assuming they're coming in untapped. The red one always makes a 1/1 that no one cares about. This one doesn't necessarily always do something. And that makes me hesitant. I think it's probably still fine to include in all of your blue decks, assuming you have a number of instants and sorceries. If you only have 2 or 3 or 4, I think you probably just cut this. But if you have any more, or if they're all, bake into a pie super good removal, you can pop this in. But I think I'm just going to keep Mystic Sanctuary at a C. Our second last card for the set review, this one's gone on a while, is Tournament Grounds. Tournament Grounds is a land at uncommon. Tap to add colorless mana to your mana pool, or tap to add red, white, or black. Spend that mana only to cast a knight or equipment spell. Are you in red, black, red, white, or white, black, or perhaps red, white, black? Take this land. It's great. Assuming that you somehow are not in one of these decks and don't have a lot of knights and some equipment hanging around. This card's just absolutely great if you are a knight deck. It is a strong C+, assuming that is the case. The equipment part isn't a huge bonus, as we talked about. There's actually not that much equipment in the set, and as always, most of it's mediocre-ish. But yeah, this is a strong C+ if you are in Mardu colors. Our final card for the set review, we've made it, is Witch's Cottage. Witch's Cottage is a land swamp at common. You tap it at a black mana. Witch's Cottage enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other swamps. When Witch's Cottage enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. So this is basically exactly like the blue one, except most decks have 13 to 17 creatures, whereas most decks have 2 to 6 instants and sorceries. You are way more likely to get value out of Witch's Cottage than you are out of Mystic Sanctuary. I think Witch's Cottage just goes into every single black deck. It's very much like the white one, like the green one, and much less like the blue one. So I think Witch's Cottage is just a solid C+. C+ for Witch's Cottage. So that's going to wrap it up for the artifacts, for the lands, and for the entire set review. I'm super excited about Eldraine. Fables and fairy tales, especially not the Disney ones and the more sort of grim ones, are totally my jam, and smashing them together is absolutely my jam. As I've said in many places, if you haven't read the comic book series Fable, go read it. It's really good. It's what The Wolf Amongst Us was from, the Telltale game. But yeah, I'm super excited for this format. Who knows if it's going to be a good draft format. It's been hit or miss lately, but I hope it is. And plus, the art is just absolutely gorgeous in the set. Let me know what you're thinking about this set. Everything. We are going to have all of the usual stuff over here. We're going to have the top 10 worst cards of the set. We're going to have the top 10 best cards. We're going to have the top 10 art. We're going to have my pre-release recap. And of course, we're going to be playing Eldraine starting next week with Spiky Saturdays. We're going to have Crack Pack Tuesdays. I will make zero promises, but I might attempt to get a collector's booster into the Crack Pack Tuesdays. And remember, Crack Pack Tuesdays, all the cards each week go to one of the patrons. So if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me over on Twitter, Twitch, and Facebook. You can find me at patreon.com/themanaleak, where you can become a backer over there and join the fine group of people. We've got a Discord. We have a Discord where we hang out and chat. It's pretty fun. You can also go over to inkedgaming.com and use the promo code MANALEAK10, all one word, 10, to get 10% off your order and help out the channel that way. The easiest, cheapest, quickest way is to like, share, and subscribe. If you do have any questions, though, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all in Eldraine.